I want to talk about non-duality as it relates to the basic fear that we all have at our core, that we are somehow flawed or unlovable. And I also want to mention the non-duality conference that's coming up in September, so stay with me. I'm Russ Rapp, and first off, I wanted to talk about the non-duality conference coming up in September. It's a virtual conference called the Nothing Conference. So you can find it online at nothingcon.com. So it's nothingcon.com. And it's got a whole list of non-dual speakers that'll be presenting live during that weekend, September 19th and 20th. I will be a part of it. I will be submitting a video for the conference. I don't know if I'll be doing any sort of live talks, but what I want to know from you is, if I make a video for the conference, what kind of topics, what kind of questions should I talk about in relation to non-duality? The burning questions that you have as it relates to this topic. So if you can leave a comment for me below, I'd really appreciate it, because I want to provide some sort of insight that will be useful for you or all the other people that will be participating on September 19th and 20th. At the Nothing Conference. So go to nothingcon.com, sign up if you haven't yet. But in this video, I want to talk a little bit about the basic fears that we all have, kind of at the core of our personality, what makes us tick, kind of behind our consciousness, what we pay attention to, the things that really affect our lives really greatly, that we don't often want to deal with. And a lot of times you come across your basic fear, your core beliefs, when crisis happens, when maybe you lose your job or a relationship ends, or you're just going through a stressful period in your life. Anything like that, you can find those moments where you see that inner part of you, that flawed part that you typically want to avoid. And it's kind of like the personality structure, like the onion analogy, where you peel back the onion and you find that core center, the inner child, whatever you want to call it. But those are the things that we try to cover up on a daily basis. We don't want to really pay attention to, because when you get to that part of yourself, of your psyche, it can be very uncomfortable. It can feel like a huge weight. It can feel really heavy, and it's something that most people don't want to have to deal with. And so we cover it up with the other structures that we have within our psyche, our personality, our ego, whatever you want to call it. And so that when you have those moments, the basic fears that we can have can be different for other people. I mean, essentially the fear is that we've sinned, that we're apart from God, but it can kind of manifest in different ways, whether you feel just like you're unlovable, or that you're incapable of dealing with life, or that you're somehow inherently or tragically flawed. There's all sorts of kind of basic fears, that flavors of it that you can have when you get to that point within your psyche. And in those moments, it feels really heavy. It feels kind of like you're approaching death. It's something that you really want to avoid. Maybe it's those moments where all these feelings that you've held within are starting to stir up, starting to really feel turbulent on the inside. It can feel like a storm's going through you, and you don't know there's nothing to hold on to. You don't know how to deal with it, how to handle it, or it just feels like this emptiness, this feeling where there is no purpose, there is no meaning to life, or specifically your life, because you're tragically flawed. So in those moments, you have these really strong feelings, or maybe seemingly no feelings at all. And I know when it comes to non-duality, sometimes people feel like, well, if I give life all the meaning it has, then what is my purpose? I give it the purpose. So there's this sense that you lose meaning, you lose purpose, but that's maybe just a reaction to the concept of non-duality. And essentially, like, at the core of our being, it's below the surface. It's the subconscious, whatever you want to call it. And a lot of times that can really affect our world in a way that we don't feel like we have control over, that we're not aware of. And it's kind of like the analogy I would use is you're at a sporting event. Your mind, your conscious narrative, your mental thoughts, those are kind of like the announcers at a sporting event, giving the play-by-play as far as what's happening on the field or on the court. So you're constantly having this mental conversation about your life, about how things are. And so when people approach non-duality, they say, okay, well, that the people calling the play-by-play, the announcers, my mental state, my conscious thinking, that's in error. So I need to fix those thoughts. And so what I want to do is, instead of believing that, there is a court or there is a person or, there's something wrong with the situation or they're calling the plays the wrong way, I can fix that. I'm going to be a better announcer. I'm going to not say these certain things, or I'm not going to think in these certain ways, or maybe I'll just stop talking and just enjoy the game as I see it. And I think on one level, that kind of mental correction can help. But below the surface, more towards the center of the onion, that subconscious, what's actually happening, the things that are inherently built within you that you don't necessarily have control over from a mental state, that's still going to be there. The game's still going to be going on. And it's kind of like the idea that your mental chatter, the announcer calling the game, comes after the thought that I am real, I exist, I have sinned, I have separate from God. And so to correct that thought that comes before all of the announcing, the judgment, the conversation, the critique of what's happening, that core thought of I am separate, I am sinful, there's no way to go back and correct that because it's not really a mental thought at all. And so that's where I feel like sometimes people struggle, is that they try to correct the essence of separation, the essence of the belief that I am a unique, separate individual away from everything that exists, and that I can live and die and that sort of thing. So trying to use the mental state, the announcer, to say, hey, we're calling a play and this is happening, but it's not happening. This isn't real. This is this is just this is just what is, however you want to describe it. You can point. That's why these conversations are great, because you can point to non-duality and the truth of it, but you'll never really get to the core of it, because you're hardwired, your subconscious, your instinct, your body is all essentially built to believe that you're a separate self. So if you look at like the animal world, the animal kingdom, the birds, the foxes, whatever that's in the fish in your environment, they might not have that consciousness, neocortex mental chatter that can think abstractly. They may not have that, but there is this essence of instinct, the drive to survive. And so a bird will fly away because it doesn't want to get eaten by the cat. And so that's just a natural instinctual thing that we have built within us. And so you can't avoid that as a human being, because that's part of who you are. And so realizing that is, and not trying to separate the mind from the body, or however you want to describe the psyche, and segmenting those all out, that's where you have this sense of wholeness. And so if you come to those situations, and maybe you're going through it right now, where there's a lot of transition in your life, or you just having a really tough time, and you had those moments where you're like, oh man, this really sucks. And you're in that moment, just picture yourself sitting in the chair, and you're having all this wave of emotions coming up that you're having to deal with, or you have this flat emptiness, this lack of meaning, and you're sitting there, all of this is happening in the moment, and you're thinking to yourself, how do I get through this? There is an emptiness behind that. There is a groundlessness behind that. And if you think about it like this, if you take in those moments where you're going through those struggles, dealing with those core issues, those basic fears that you've always wanted to avoid and cover up, when you have those moments, the great thing about the mind, it's not the enemy. You can actually think abstractly, like in the sense that what's happening in this moment. You're still going to have all this stuff happening that you're not going to be able to get rid of, but you can really be present with that. And when you're thinking about it, what's happening right now, in those moments when you're sitting there having a moment, just realize that what's happening is there's a person sitting in a chair. Odds are there's maybe nothing else going on around you. It's like every other moment in your life. And so if you look at it objectively, and you came upon a scene of you sitting there in a chair, and you don't know what's going on internally, you walk by that and you would say, hey, there's a person sitting in a chair. That's literally what's happening. But your story, all these emotions, all this emptiness, all this fear, all this anger, whatever's happening is there. But you're still just a person sitting in a chair. And so that's not going to really give you, in the moment, not going to necessarily give you solace, because you're still going to feel that. But realize that's what's happening, and take that moment to really dig into that, really feel those feelings, because in a sense you're safe, because that's the truth of non-duality, essentially, that this too shall pass, because what is present in the moment isn't real in the sense that it will not be there. You'll find a balance point. It'll eventually go away, because that's what always happens. There's in the dualistic sense, that's what always happens. There's always life and there's always death. There's always one moment to the next. You're thinking in time. But with non-duality, there is no time within time. There is that infinite absolute. And so when you're having a mental breakdown, when you're having an emotional catharsis, just sit with it, because you'll see the calm behind the storm. And if you don't, that's fine too. So hopefully that makes sense to you. I'm going to take a moment here, make sure I center myself. Maybe there's something else I wanted to say. Isn't that great? There's no talking. It's just peaceful, quiet silence. But even in the storms, there's the peace behind it. So check out the Non-duality conference, nothingcon.com. Subscribe, like, do all that. Leave your comments. I love to hear what you have to say. So, and until next time, peace.